Four men built an empire on lies. One survivor came back to bury them in truth. When the Carter family arrives in Gold Ridge seeking fortune, they find a town where justice wears a price tag and power answers to no law. A quiet drifter named Eli Cross rides beside them, a man with empty pockets and haunted eyes. But Gold Ridge isn't ready for what he truly carries: a list of names, a buried past, and a reckoning 15 years in the making. Stay until the end to discover what justice really costs on the frontier. Like this video and comment your city so I can see how far this story reaches across the world. The wagon wheel hit another rut, and Martha Carter gripped the wooden seat until her knuckles went white. Dust rose in choking clouds around them, turning the afternoon sun into a hazy copper disk that offered heat but no comfort. Beside her, Samuel Carter kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead, jaw set in that stubborn line she'd learned to recognize over 23 years of marriage. The look that said he'd made up his mind and heaven itself couldn't turn him back. In the wagon bed behind them, their daughter Sarah tried to keep 4-year-old Benjamin still while he whined about the heat. The boy's face was streaked with dirt and dried tears, his little body worn thin by 3 months of relentless travel. Martha wanted to turn around, to hold him, to whisper that it would all be worth it soon, but the words felt hollow in her mouth, tasting of dust and doubt. "How much further?" she asked, though she'd asked the same question that morning. Samuel didn't answer immediately. His weathered hands worked the reins with practiced ease, guiding their 2 exhausted horses around a scatter of rocks that could have broken an axle. When he finally spoke, his voice carried that forced optimism she'd grown to dread. "Shouldn't be more than another day. Maybe 2 if we take it slow. Maybe 2. Always maybe. Maybe they'd find their son's mine. Maybe the claim would be honored. Maybe Gold Ridge would be the fresh start they'd mortgaged everything to chase." Martha looked down at her hands, once soft, once proud of their delicacy, now cracked and roughened by months of campfire smoke and prairie wind. Her wedding ring felt loose on her finger. They'd all gotten thinner on this journey. The sound of hoofbeats made Samuel pull up on the reins. A rider approached from behind, moving at an easy lope that suggested someone in no particular hurry. Martha felt her husband tense beside her, his right hand sliding toward the rifle wedged between the seat boards. Out here, strangers could mean danger. They'd passed enough burned-out wagons to know that. But as the rider drew closer, Martha saw he rode alone, just a man on a tired-looking roan horse, leading a pack mule that carried surprisingly little gear. He was tall in the saddle, lean in a way that suggested hard living rather than hunger, dressed in worn canvas pants and a shirt that might have been blue once but had faded to the color of winter sky. A hat shadowed his face. "Afternoon," the stranger called out, slowing his horse to match their wagon's pace. His voice was quiet, almost gentle, not the rough bark Martha had learned to expect from frontiermen. Samuel nodded curtly. "Afternoon." "Road to Gold Ridge, huh?" the stranger asked, though the question seemed more courtesy than actual need for information. There was only one road out here, cutting through the valley like a scar. "That's where we're headed," Samuel admitted, still wary. The stranger glanced at their wagon, taking in the worn canvas top, the meager supplies, the exhausted horses. His eyes, Martha noticed, were pale gray, the color of smoke or distant rain. They held something she couldn't quite name, not threat exactly, but not warmth either. Just a kind of distant assessment, as if he were looking at them from very far away. "Mind if I ride along?" he asked. "Gets lonely out here." Martha saw her husband's hesitation. They had so little. Sharing even conversation felt like a risk. But before Samuel could answer, Benjamin poked his head out from the wagon cover. "Mama, I'm thirsty." The stranger's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those pale eyes. He reached for his canteen without being asked, held it out toward the wagon. "Water's fresh." Filled it at a spring about 5 miles back. Sarah took it carefully, helped her little brother drink. The stranger waited patiently, didn't rush them, didn't make a show of his generosity. When Benjamin had his fill and Sarah handed the canteen back, the man simply nodded and tucked it back on his saddle. "Name's Eli Cross," he said. "I'll keep my distance if you'd prefer, but the road ahead gets rough, and there's safety in numbers." Samuel studied him for a long moment. Martha could feel her husband weighing the risks, stranger danger against the comfort of another gun, another pair of eyes watching the horizon. Finally, he gave a short nod. Samuel Carter. This is my wife Martha, my daughter Sarah, and my grandson Benjamin. If Eli Cross noticed the way Samuel's voice caught slightly on the word grandson, noticed the absence of mention of Sarah's husband or of the parents who should have been caring for a 4-year-old, he gave no sign. He simply tipped his hat to Martha and Sarah, urged his horse forward to ride alongside the wagon at a respectful distance. They traveled in silence for a while. The sun began its slow descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rust. The land here was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. Rolling hills covered in sage and bunch grass, rocky outcroppings that jutted up like broken teeth, and in the distance, the snow-capped peaks that marked the territory's spine. It was Sarah who finally broke the silence. "Mr. Cross, have you been to Gold Ridge before?" Eli turned in his saddle to look at her. Up close, Martha could see he was younger than she'd first thought. Maybe 35, though the lines around his eyes and mouth suggested a life that had aged him. "Once," he said, "some years back." "What's it like?" Benjamin piped up, his child's voice bright with curiosity despite his exhaustion. Eli considered the question carefully, as if it mattered more than simple small talk. "It's a boomtown," he said finally, "built up fast on gold fever and big promises. Lots of people chasing dreams there." "Do they find them?" Benjamin asked. "The dreams?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Eli's expression remained neutral, but Martha saw something shift behind his eyes, a shadow passing through smoke. "Some do," Eli said quietly. "Most don't." Samuel cleared his throat, clearly wanting to change the subject. "We've got a claim to a mine. Our son," his voice caught, and he had to start again. "Our son found a good strike about a year back. Wrote to us about it. Said it was the real thing, not just color in a pan." Eli nodded slowly. "Your son working the claim now?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Martha felt the familiar weight settle over her chest, the grief that never quite went away, just learned to hide in the spaces between breaths. "He passed last winter," Sarah said softly, one hand resting on Benjamin's small shoulder. "Fever took him, but he filed his claim proper, got it registered in Gold Ridge before he died. Left it to us in his will. We've come to work it, make his dream live on." Eli was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a gentleness that surprised Martha. "I'm sorry for your loss." "You know anything about mining, Mr. Cross?" Samuel asked, clearly trying to push past the moment of vulnerability. "Some," Eli admitted. "Worked a few claims in my time. Never struck it rich, but I know the difference between real ore and fool's gold." Samuel seemed to relax slightly at that. "Maybe you could take a look at our claim once we get there. Give us your honest assessment. We'd pay you for your time." "No need for payment," Eli said. "Happy to help if I can." They made camp that evening in a hollow protected from the wind, near a creek that still ran clear and cold despite the summer heat. Samuel and Eli worked together to unhitch the horses, while Martha and Sarah prepared a simple meal of beans and the last of their salted pork. Benjamin collected firewood, small sticks he could carry, his little face serious with the importance of his task. As darkness settled and the fire crackled to life, they ate in companionable silence. The food was plain but hot, and Martha noticed that Eli ate sparingly, leaving most of his portion for them. When Sarah tried to give him more, he shook his head with a slight smile. "I'm used to traveling light," he said. After the meal, Sarah put Benjamin to bed in the wagon while the adults sat around the fire. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like thrown salt. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out, a lonely, wild sound that made the darkness feel larger. Samuel pulled out his pipe, tamped tobacco into the bowl with his thumb. "You said you've been to Gold Ridge before, Mr. Cross. What can you tell us about it?" Eli stared into the fire, his face half-shadowed, half-lit by the dancing flames. For a moment, Martha thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but clear. "Gold Ridge sits in a valley where 3 creeks come together. Good water, good timber in the hills. The town itself grew up fast, maybe too fast. 5 years ago, there were barely 50 people there. Now there's close to 2,000, maybe more. Main Street's got a bank, 2 hotels, 4 saloons, a church, general store, assay office. Everything a proper town needs." "Sounds prosperous," Samuel said, a note of hope in his voice. Eli's expression remained neutral. It is. For some. Martha noticed the careful way he said it, the weight he put on those last two words. What do you mean? Eli looked at her directly, and in the firelight, his pale eyes seemed to hold depths she hadn't noticed before. In a boom town, there's always folks who strike it rich pulling gold from the ground. But the real fortunes get made by the people who pull gold from the miners. The ones who own the land office, the assay office, the bank. The ones who set the prices and write the rules. Samuel frowned. That's just business, isn't it? Sometimes, Eli agreed. And sometimes it's something else. What do you mean? Sarah asked, leaning forward. Eli poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up into the darkness. Just that in a place like Gold Ridge, it pays to be careful, to know who you're dealing with, to get everything in writing and keep your own records. Our son was careful, Samuel said, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. He knew what he was doing, filed everything proper. I'm sure he did, Eli said quietly. Just saying it's good to be cautious. Towns like that, they can chew people up if they're not watching. Martha felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. You make it sound dangerous. Eli looked at her again, and this time she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. A kind of deep, old anger, carefully banked but never quite extinguished. The frontier's always dangerous, ma'am, he said softly. The trick is knowing where the real threats come from. They fell silent after that. Samuel smoked his pipe. Martha mended a tear in Benjamin's shirt. Sarah wrote in the small journal she kept. Eli sat still, watching the fire burn down, his expression distant and unreadable. Finally, Samuel stood and stretched. We should get some rest. Want to make good time tomorrow? Eli nodded. I'll take first watch if you like. Let you folks sleep. No need, Samuel started, but Eli cut him off gently. I'm a light sleeper anyway. Might as well make myself useful. Samuel hesitated, then nodded. Wake me in a few hours. We'll split it. But when Martha woke in the deep hours of the night, needing to step away from the wagon for a moment, she saw that Eli was still awake, sitting by the rebuilt fire, his rifle across his knees. He glanced up as she returned, gave her a slight nod, but said nothing. She lay awake for a long time after that, listening to Samuel's steady breathing beside her, trying to understand what it was about Eli Cross that unsettled her. Not fear exactly. He'd been nothing but courteous, even kind. But there was something beneath his quiet manner, something coiled and waiting, like a gun that looked harmless until you noticed it was loaded and cocked. Morning came with a red sky that promised heat. They broke camp efficiently, fell into an easy routine despite having traveled together for less than a day. Benjamin seemed to have adopted Eli as a new source of fascination, peppering him with questions that the quiet man answered patiently. Where are you from, Mr. Cross? Different places. Where's your family? A pause. Gone. Where are you going? The longest pause. Gold Ridge. Why? Eli looked down at the small boy, and Martha saw his expression soften almost imperceptibly. To finish something I started a long time ago. By midday, they could see smoke on the horizon, cook fires and forge fires from Gold Ridge. The road began to show more traffic, other wagons, riders, even a stagecoach that rumbled past them in a cloud of dust. The closer they got, the more signs of civilization appeared. Claim markers, survey stakes, rough cabins built in the hills. And then, as they crested a final rise, Gold Ridge itself spread out before them. The town sat in a valley that cupped 3 converging creeks like silver threads. Even from a distance, Martha could see it was thriving. Streets laid out in a rough grid, buildings ranging from rough-hewn cabins to proper 2-story structures with glass windows. The main street was wide and busy, crowded with wagons and horses. Beyond the town, the hills were pocked with mine entrances. Stamping mills sent up regular thunder, and sluice operations diverted water from the creeks. It's bigger than I expected, Sarah breathed. Samuel was grinning, the first real smile Martha had seen from him in months. Look at it, a real town, not some rough camp. We made the right choice coming here. Martha wanted to share his optimism, but something about the scene below made her uneasy. Maybe it was the way the buildings seemed to crowd together, or the smoke that hung in the valley like fog. Or maybe it was the way Eli had gone completely still beside them, his hands tight on his reins, his jaw clenched. "Mr. Cross?" she asked quietly. "Are you all right?" For a moment he didn't answer. His eyes scanned the town below with an intensity that was almost frightening. Then he seemed to shake himself, relaxed his grip. "Fine," he said, but his voice was tight. "Just been a while since I've seen it." They descended into the valley as the afternoon sun slanted long across the buildings. The noise hit them first, the constant hammer of industry, voices calling out in a dozen languages, the squeal of wagon wheels and clang of metal on metal. Gold Ridge was alive in a way that felt both exciting and overwhelming. Samuel guided their wagon down the main street, and Martha tried to take it all in. The buildings were a mix of permanent structures and false-fronted shops that looked impressive from the street, but were little more than tents from the side. Signs advertised everything from hot baths to legal services to the latest fashions from San Francisco. Men crowded the wooden sidewalks, miners in rough clothes, businessmen in suits, cowboys, freighters, gamblers, and drifters. "There's the land office," Samuel said, pointing to a substantial brick building. "That's where we'll need to go to verify the claim." But before they could head that direction, a man stepped into the street in front of their wagon, forcing Samuel to pull up hard on the reins. He was big, not just tall, but broad, with the kind of muscle that came from hard work. His clothes were dusty, but of good quality, and he wore a deputy's star pinned to his vest. "Afternoon," he said, his voice carrying easy authority. "New arrivals?" "That's right," Samuel replied, trying to keep his voice friendly despite the abruptness of the stop. "Carter family from Missouri, we've got a claim to verify." The deputy's eyes swept over them, lingering on Martha and Sarah in a way that made Martha's skin crawl, then moving to their meager possessions, finally settling on Eli, who sat his horse slightly apart from the wagon. "And you?" the deputy asked. "Just traveling through," Eli said quietly. The deputy studied him for a long moment. Something passed between the two men, not quite recognition, but a kind of weighing, an assessment. Finally, the deputy nodded. "Name's Garrett, deputy to Sheriff Morrison. You folks need anything, you let us know. Sheriff likes to keep things peaceful in Gold Ridge." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Real peaceful." "We appreciate that," Samuel said. Garrett stepped aside, but as the wagon began to move, he called out, "Land office closes at 5 o'clock sharp. You'll want to get there before then if you've got business today." They made their way down the street, found a place to stable the horses and secure the wagon. The stable owner, a wizened man with one cloudy eye, quoted them a price that made Samuel wince but pay anyway. Everything in Gold Ridge, Martha was learning, cost more than expected. The land office was still open when they arrived, though the clerk behind the counter looked impatient to close up. He was a thin man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers, his manner brusque and official. "We're here about a claim," Samuel explained, pulling out the papers they'd carried all this way. His son's will, the claim certificate, letters from the assay office. "The Golden Promise Mine, filed by James Carter, deceased. We're his family, here to take over the claim." The clerk barely glanced at the papers. "Name?" "James Carter." The clerk turned to a massive ledger, ran his finger down columns of entries. He flipped back several pages, frowned, flipped forward again. "No golden promise listed here," he said finally. Samuel's face went pale. "That's impossible. My son filed this claim a year ago. It's right here." He tapped the certificate. "Registered, witnessed, everything proper." The clerk looked at the certificate more closely, his frown deepening. "This is a claim certificate, sure enough, but it's not in our current registry. Must have been transferred or sold." "Transferred?" Martha felt her heart sink. "To who?" The clerk turned back to his ledger. "Let's see, Golden Promise. Here it is. Currently held by the Gold Ridge Development Company, acquired 8 months ago for unpaid taxes and fees." The words hit like a physical blow. Samuel gripped the counter's edge. "Unpaid taxes? My son was working that claim right up until he died. He wouldn't have let it go to tax default." The clerk shrugged, unmoved by Samuel's distress. "That's what the record shows. If you want to dispute it, you'll need to take it up with the development company, or file a claim with the territorial court." Where do we find this development company? Sarah asked, her voice shaking. They've got offices above the bank, but they're closed now. You'll have to come back Monday morning. The clerk was already turning away, clearly done with them. They walked out into the late afternoon sun in a daze. All the optimism that had carried them through 3 months of brutal travel, all the hope they'd clung to, it felt like sand slipping through their fingers. This can't be happening, Samuel said, his voice hollow. The claim was his. It was supposed to be ours. How could it just be gone? Martha wanted to comfort him, but she had no words. Beside her, Sarah had gone pale, one hand pressed to her mouth as if holding back tears. Only Benjamin seemed unaffected, tugging at his mother's skirt and asking when they could eat. It was Eli who finally spoke. He'd been standing a few feet away, giving them space for their private grief. But now he stepped closer. The Golden Promise, he said quietly. Where is it located? Samuel fumbled with his papers, found a survey map James had sent them. Here, in the North Hills, along Willow Creek. Eli studied the map, his expression unreadable. I know that area. Good ground for gold. If your son found ore there, it would be valuable. Then why would he let it go to tax default? Martha asked desperately. James was careful. He wouldn't have... He didn't, Eli said flatly. They all turned to look at him. His pale eyes had gone cold, hard as winter ice. What do you mean? Samuel asked. I mean that this... Eli gestured at the land office behind them. Is a trick as old as the frontier. Someone sees a valuable claim, they want it, but the owner won't sell. So they find another way. File false tax liens, forge documents. Wait until the owner is sick or gone, then swoop in and claim the property was abandoned or defaulted. He looked at Samuel directly. Your son didn't let his claim go. It was stolen from him. The word hung in the air like gun smoke. But that's illegal, Sarah protested weakly. Eli's expression was grim. Only if the law cares. And in a place like Gold Ridge, the law usually belongs to whoever can afford to own it. The development company? Martha said slowly, understanding dawning. Who owns it? That, Eli said, is what we need to find out. They found a boarding house that would take them, a rough place but clean enough, run by a German widow who asked no questions and accepted their money with a nod. The room was small, barely big enough for the 4 of them, but after months of sleeping in the wagon, even thin walls and a sagging bed felt like luxury. That evening, they ate at a restaurant on the main street, another expense they couldn't afford, but Sarah argued that they needed a proper meal and information, and restaurants were where people talked. She was right. As they sat at a corner table picking at fried chicken and potatoes, they listened to the conversations flowing around them. Gold Ridge was prosperous. Everyone agreed on that. The mines were producing. The town was growing. Fortunes were being made. But underneath the optimism, Martha detected undercurrents of something else. Complaints quickly silenced. Bitter looks when certain names were mentioned. A wariness in how people spoke, as if aware they might be overheard. The name that came up most often was Blackwood. Blackwood's bought out another 3 claims this month, one miner muttered to his companion, offering half what they're worth. But if you don't sell, somehow your taxes triple, or your permits get delayed, or... Keep your voice down, his friend hissed. You want to end up like Harrison? What happened to Harrison? Resisted an eviction, they said. Deputy Garrett had to defend himself. Coroner ruled it justified. The first miner fell silent, staring into his coffee. At another table, 2 merchants discussed the new bank fees that had just been implemented. 30%? That's robbery. That's business. You want to store your gold anywhere else? Good luck. Blackwood owns the only secure vault in the territory. Eli had joined them for the meal, sitting quietly and eating little, but Martha saw his attention sharpen at each mention of the name. Finally, when they'd finished eating and were walking back toward the boarding house, she asked him directly, Who is Blackwood? Eli was quiet for a long moment, his eyes scanning the darkening street. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. Marcus Blackwood. He owns the Gold Ridge Development Company, and the bank, and the largest mine, and most of the commercial property on Main Street. If there's money moving in this town, Blackwood gets a piece of it. How does one man get that much power? Sarah asked. Same way it always happens, Eli said. By being smarter, more ruthless, and more connected than everyone else. and by making sure the people who could stop him either work for him or fear him. They'd reached the boarding house, but Samuel stopped on the porch, turning to face Eli. "You seem to know a lot about how things work here." "I pay attention," Eli said simply. "It's more than that." Samuel's voice had taken on an edge. "You knew exactly what had happened to our claim before we even looked into it. You know about Blackwood, about the town, about everything. Why?" Eli met his gaze steadily. In the lamplight from the boarding house window, his face was half-shadowed, unreadable. "Because I've seen it happen before, in other towns, other places. The frontier runs on a pattern, Mr. Carter. Same plays, different players." "But you said you'd been here before," Martha said softly. "To Gold Ridge specifically." A long silence. Somewhere down the street, a piano played badly in one of the saloons. A dog barked. Normal sounds of a frontier evening. But Martha felt like she was balanced on the edge of something, a truth waiting to tip over into view. "I was here," Eli said finally. 15 years ago. The town was smaller then, different in some ways, the same in others. "Why did you come back?" Sarah asked. Eli looked at her, and for just a moment, the mask of quiet neutrality slipped. What Martha saw beneath it made her breath catch, a grief so deep and old it had fossilized into something harder than stone. "To finish something," he said quietly, "like I told your boy." He tipped his hat to them and walked away, disappearing into the shadows between buildings before any of them could ask another question. That night, Martha lay awake listening to her family breathe around her. Samuel's troubled snoring, Sarah's quiet sighs, Benjamin's soft child whispers in his sleep. Through the thin walls, she could hear Gold Ridge living its nightlife, music, laughter, occasional shouts, the steady traffic of a town that never quite slept. She thought about everything they'd lost to get here. Their farm, sold for a fraction of its worth. Their savings, spent on this journey. Sarah's few precious possessions from her married life. All of it wagered on James's dream, on his promise that he'd found something real. And now that dream was gone too. Stolen by men with lawyers and ledgers and the law on their side. But as she drifted toward uneasy sleep, Martha found herself thinking not about their loss, but about Eli Cross. About the way he'd looked at Gold Ridge from that hilltop, like a man seeing a ghost. About the careful control in his voice when he spoke of Blackwood. About the grief beneath his calm. What had happened here 15 years ago? What had this town done to him? And what was he planning to do about it? She had no answers. Only a growing certainty that their arrival in Gold Ridge had set something in motion, something that had been waiting, patient and cold, for exactly the right moment to begin. Outside her window, she heard a sound that might have been thunder in the distant mountains. Or it might have been something else entirely, something like a storm gathering in the dark. Morning came too early, bringing with it the sounds of Gold Ridge waking to another day of commerce and ambition. Martha dressed quietly, careful not to wake Benjamin, who'd finally fallen into deep sleep near dawn. Through the thin window, she could see the main street already filling with traffic, freight wagons hauling ore to the stamp mills, men heading to the mines, merchants opening their shops. Samuel was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, with James's papers spread across his lap. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight, his face drawn and gray in the morning light. "We'll go to the development company offices first thing," he said, not looking up. "There has to be some mistake, some record they missed. James wouldn't have—" "Papa." Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. She'd been awake too, Martha realized. Probably none of them had truly slept. "We heard what people said last night about Blackwood, about what happens to people who fight him." "I'm not going to just hand over what's rightfully ours," Samuel snapped, then immediately softened, reaching for his daughter's hand. "I'm sorry. We've lost so much already. I can't lose this too. I can't let your brother's dream die for nothing." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Martha opened it to find Eli Cross standing in the narrow hallway, hat in hand. He looked like he hadn't slept either, though his clothes were brushed clean and his jaw freshly shaved. "Thought you might want company when you visit the development company," he said quietly, "if you're still planning to go." Samuel stood quickly. "You don't owe us anything, Mr. Cross. This isn't your fight." Something flickered in Eli's pale eyes, there and gone too fast to read. "Maybe not. But I know how these things go. Having a witness present might keep the conversation more honest. They left Benjamin with the German widow, who agreed to watch him for a small fee. The boy protested until Sarah promised they'd bring him something sweet from the general store, then settled reluctantly into playing with wooden blocks the widow produced from somewhere in her cluttered kitchen. The Goldridge Development Company occupied the entire second floor of the bank building, the most substantial structure on Main Street, built of red brick hauled all the way from Denver. A brass plaque beside the door gleamed in the morning sun, polished to a mirror shine. Everything about the place spoke of permanence, of power, of money so old and established it didn't need to shout. Inside, a young clerk sat at a desk in an anteroom, decorated with leather chairs and oil paintings of mountain landscapes. He looked up as they entered, his expression polite but dismissive, the kind of look that said he could assess a person's worth in a glance, and had already decided theirs was minimal. "May I help you?" "We need to speak with someone about a mining claim," Samuel said, trying to keep his voice level. "The Golden Promise mine. There's been some kind of mistake in the records." "Mr. Blackwood doesn't meet with walk-ins," the clerk interrupted smoothly. "If you'd like to schedule an appointment, we've traveled 3 months to get here," Martha said, stepping forward. She kept her voice quiet but let steel enter it, the tone she'd used raising 2 children and running a household when Samuel was away at war. "Our son died believing his claim was secure. The least Mr. Blackwood can do is spare us 15 minutes to explain how it ended up in his possession." The clerk's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, a calculation being made. "1 moment." He disappeared through a door behind his desk. They waited in silence, the tick of a grandfather clock marking each second with painful precision. Eli stood slightly apart from them, his attention seemingly on one of the landscape paintings, but Martha noticed how his eyes tracked every movement in the street outside the window, every person who passed by. The clerk returned. "Mr. Blackwood will see you, briefly." They were ushered into an office that took up most of the second floor. Windows on 3 sides offered commanding views of Gold Ridge, the main street to the east, the mine-dotted hills to the north, the stamp mills and sluice operations to the west. Every direction you looked, you saw wealth being extracted from the earth. The man behind the massive oak desk stood as they entered. Marcus Blackwood was in his late 40s, Martha guessed, though he wore his age well. Tall, broad-shouldered, with silver threading through dark hair, he wore swept back from a high forehead. His suit was Eastern-tailored, his hands manicured, but there was something in his face that spoke of harder origins, a roughness around the edges that no amount of polish could quite erase. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice carrying the cultured tones of education, but with a frontier flatness underneath. "My condolences on your son's passing. James, wasn't it? Fine young man. We were all sorry to lose him." The casual familiarity of it, the presumption that he'd known James, that he had any right to speak of loss, made Martha's hands clench. But Samuel spoke before she could. "You knew our son?" "Gold Ridge is still a small enough town that we all know each other, Mr. Carter. James worked several claims in these hills. Ambitious young man. Always looking for the big strike." Blackwood gestured to the leather chairs facing his desk. "Please, sit. You've come about the Golden Promise, I assume?" They sat. Eli remained standing near the door, his presence somehow both unobtrusive and impossible to ignore. Blackwood's eyes flicked to him once, held for a moment, then returned to Samuel. "There's been a mistake," Samuel said, pulling out his papers. "According to the land office, you've acquired my son's claim for unpaid taxes. But that's impossible. James was current on all his fees and permits. He wrote to us every month. He would have mentioned if— May I see those documents?" Blackwood reached across the desk, and after a moment's hesitation, Samuel handed them over. Blackwood studied them carefully, his expression thoughtful. When he finally looked up, something like sympathy touched his features. "I'm afraid there's no mistake, Mr. Carter. The Golden Promise went to tax default in February of this year. Standard procedure in such cases, the claim is auctioned to recover the owed fees. My company acquired it legally and properly." "But James was alive in February," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "He didn't die until March. He would never have let his claim default." "Your son was very ill in February, Miss Carter." Blackwood's tone was gentle, but his words cut like knives. The fever that eventually took him began months before his death. I visited him myself several times, tried to convince him to come into town to see a doctor. But he was stubborn, insisted on staying at the claim, working it even when he could barely stand. In his condition, I imagine paperwork was the last thing on his mind. The image he painted, of James sick and alone, too proud or too desperate to ask for help, felt like truth. Martha remembered her son's letters from that winter, how the handwriting had grown shakier, the words less frequent. She told herself it was just the cold, the isolation. But she'd known, hadn't she? She'd known something was wrong and had done nothing. Even so, Samuel said, his voice thick, the claim should have passed to his heirs, to us. That was in his will. Blackwood nodded slowly. Ordinarily, yes. But there's a territorial statute that says a claim must be actively worked to remain valid. When James became too ill to work it, and with no other registered partners on the claim, it was deemed abandoned. The tax default was simply the legal mechanism that formalized what had already occurred. He paused, letting that sink in. I'm sorry. I know that's not what you wanted to hear, but the law is clear. The law, Eli said quietly from his position by the door, is whatever benefits you, Mr. Blackwood. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Blackwood's eyes went to Eli, really seeing him for the first time. Something passed between the two men, a recognition that made the air feel electric. Do I know you? Blackwood asked, his voice carefully neutral. No, Eli said, but I know you. Blackwood studied him for a long moment, then turned back to Samuel with a practiced smile. Mr. Carter, I understand your frustration. You've come a long way expecting to find a valuable asset, only to learn it's no longer available. That's a bitter disappointment. But I'm not an unreasonable man. The Golden Promise is a good claim. Your son had an excellent eye for ore. My company is currently working it, and we're pulling decent color from the diggings. He opened a drawer in his desk, pulled out a leather-bound ledger. I'm prepared to offer you compensation. Not the full value of the claim. Legally, I'm not obligated to give you anything. But as a gesture of goodwill, in recognition of your loss and the distance you've traveled, shall we say $500? The number hung in the air. It was more money than Samuel made in a year farming, more than they'd spent on their entire journey west. But it was also a fraction of what a producing gold claim was worth, especially one that Blackwood himself admitted was pulling good color. Samuel opened his mouth, and Martha saw the temptation in his eyes. $500 would set them up, give them a start in this new territory. It would mean James's death hadn't been for nothing. But before Samuel could speak, Sarah stood abruptly. No. Blackwood raised an eyebrow. Miss Carter. That claim belonged to my husband, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the tears beginning to gather in her eyes. He worked himself to death on it. And now you want to pay us pennies on the dollar because you have lawyers and we don't? Because you can twist the law into whatever shape serves you? She shook her head. No, that's not justice. Justice, Blackwood said quietly, is a luxury in the frontier, Miss Carter. What I'm offering is mercy. Take it or leave it. We'll take it to the territorial court, Samuel said, finding his spine. File a proper claim. Blackwood's expression didn't change, but something hardened in his eyes. The territorial court meets in Denver, Mr. Carter. Once every 3 months. The next session is in November, 5 months from now. Filing a claim will cost you $200 in fees. You'll need a lawyer, which will cost you another $500, minimum. And while you wait for your case to be heard, you'll need somewhere to live, food to eat, expenses to cover. He paused. Can you afford all that? Because I can. I can afford to tie this up in court for years if I have to. Can you? The truth of it was crushing. They had perhaps $50 left to their names. Barely enough to survive a month in Goldridge, let alone fund a legal battle against a man who owned half the town. I thought not, Blackwood said, not unkindly. My offer stands for 24 hours. After that, it goes away, and you're left with nothing but your pride. Think about what that's worth to you. They left the office in silence, descending the stairs like mourners leaving a funeral. On the street, the morning sun felt too bright, the sounds of the town too loud. Martha felt hollowed out, scraped clean of hope. He's right, Samuel said finally, his voice broken. We can't fight him. We have nothing to fight with. We have the truth, Sarah said fiercely. The truth doesn't matter if no one with power cares about it, Samuel replied. He looked at Eli, who'd been silent through the entire exchange. You tried to warn us last night. You knew this would happen. I knew it was likely, Eli said quietly. Men like Blackwood, they've perfected the art of legal theft. They know exactly how far they can push before it becomes criminal. They stay just inside the line, where the law protects them instead of the people they're taking from. So we just accept it? Martha heard the desperation in her own voice. We just let him win? Eli looked at her, and for the first time since they'd met him, she saw something dangerous flicker in his pale eyes. I didn't say that. Before anyone could ask what he meant, a commotion down the street drew their attention. A crowd was gathering near the general store, voices raised in alarm. They heard someone shout for the doctor, heard a woman scream. Without thinking, they moved toward the crowd. People parted reluctantly, revealing a scene that made Martha's stomach turn. A man lay in the dust, his face bloodied, one arm bent at an unnatural angle. Standing over him were two men Martha recognized from the previous day, Deputy Garrett and another man wearing a deputy's star. I told you to move your wagon, Garrett was saying, his voice carrying easily over the crowd. It was blocking the street. I had the legal right to impound it. You broke my arm, the man on the ground gasped out. Blood ran from a cut above his eye. I was trying to move it. You didn't have to. You resisted, Garrett said flatly. Witnesses will confirm it. Now get yourself to the doctor before I charge you with interfering with an officer. The injured man struggled to his feet, cradling his broken arm, and stumbled away. The crowd began to disperse, people ducking their heads, avoiding eye contact. No one challenged Garrett's version of events. No one offered to help the injured man. But Martha noticed something. As people melted back into their daily routines, she caught fragments of whispered conversations, saw the anger and fear in their eyes. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. It was just another day in Gold Ridge. That's the third one this month, a woman muttered to her companion as they passed. Garrett's getting worse. Or he's getting orders to be worse, the companion replied darkly. Keep people scared. Keep them in line. Eli had gone very still, watching Garrett walk away with his partner. His hands were loosed at his sides, but Martha saw the tension in his shoulders, the controlled breathing of someone fighting not to act. Mr. Cross, she said softly. Don't. He looked at her, and she saw the struggle in his face, duty against desire, patience against rage. Finally, he exhaled slowly and nodded. Not yet. They spent the rest of the morning wandering Gold Ridge, ostensibly looking at the town but really just avoiding the decision they'd have to make about Blackwood's offer. Everywhere they went, they saw the same pattern, prosperity and fear existing side by side. Businesses thriving while their owners flinched at footsteps behind them, a town growing rich while its people grew smaller. They stopped at a small restaurant for lunch, cheaper than the place they'd eaten the night before, frequented by miners and laborers rather than businessmen. The food was plain but filling, and the atmosphere was looser, people talking more freely without the weight of watching eyes. At the table beside them, three miners were deep in conversation. One was older, with a face weathered by decades of hard living. The other two were younger, still carrying the optimism of men who believed hard work would be rewarded. I'm telling you, something's going to change, the older miner was saying. Can't keep going like this. Blackwood can't own everything, control everything. Why not? One of the younger men challenged. Who's going to stop him? The sheriff works for him. The judge is in his pocket. Half the businesses on Main Street owe him money. He's got this whole town by the throat. Someone will stop him, the older miner insisted. Someone always does. Gets too greedy, pushes too hard, and someone pushes back. That's how the frontier works. The frontier works, the third miner said bitterly, by whoever's got the most guns and the least conscience winning. And that's Blackwood through and through. The older miner fell silent, unable to argue against the truth of it. Sarah was picking at her food, her expression distant. Finally, she looked up at her father. Papa, what are we going to do? Samuel didn't answer immediately. He stared at his plate, jaw working, pride and practicality warring in his face. I don't know, he admitted finally. If we take Blackwood's money, we can start over somewhere else. Buy a small piece of land, build a cabin. It wouldn't be the fortune we hoped for, but it would be something. It would be giving up, Sarah said quietly. It would be saying that James died for nothing, that his dream doesn't matter, that justice doesn't matter. Justice, Samuel said heavily, is what you can afford. And we can't afford much. Martha reached across the table, took his weathered hand in hers. There has to be another way. There isn't, Samuel's voice cracked. Don't you think I want to fight? Don't you think I want to march back into that office and tell Blackwood where he can shove his offer? But what good would it do except make us feel righteous while we starve? Eli had been quiet through the meal, but now he spoke. The offer stands for 24 hours. They all looked at him. So? Samuel asked. So that means you have time before you have to decide, time to gather information, time to see if there are other options. What other options? Martha asked. Eli's expression was carefully neutral. I don't know yet, but I've learned that in situations like this, knowledge is worth more than gold. The more you understand about Blackwood's operation, about how he acquired the claim, about what he's really doing with it, the more options you might have. You're talking about investigating him? Sarah asked, leaning forward. Finding proof that he stole the claim illegally? I'm talking about gathering facts, Eli corrected. What you do with those facts is your decision. Samuel looked at him with a mixture of hope and suspicion. Why are you helping us? What's in this for you? Eli was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft but carried weight. Let's just say Blackwood and I have unfinished business. Helping you might help me settle it. What kind of business? Martha asked. But Eli had already stood, dropping coins on the table to cover his portion of the meal. I'll meet you back at the boarding house this evening. Until then, keep your heads down and your mouths shut. In a town like this, the wrong word to the wrong person can get you killed. He walked out before they could ask anything else, leaving them staring after him. That afternoon, while Samuel took Benjamin to the general store as promised, Martha and Sarah did some investigating of their own. They visited the church, a small building at the edge of town where a tired-looking pastor welcomed them warmly. He'd known James, he said, had seen him occasionally in town before the illness took hold. He was a good young man, the pastor said, his weathered face creasing with genuine sorrow. Honest, hard-working. It's a shame what happened. To him or to his claim? Sarah asked pointedly. The pastor's expression grew guarded. I don't get involved in business matters, Miss Carter. That's between men and the law. What if the law is corrupt? Martha asked quietly. What if the men using it are thieves? The pastor looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the struggle in his eyes, the desire to speak truth against the need to survive. Finally, he sighed. I've been in Goldridge for 3 years, Mrs. Carter. I've buried 17 men in that time. 3 died in mining accidents, 2 from disease. The rest, he paused. The rest died in what the sheriff called justifiable incidents. Resisting arrest, self-defense, legal shootings, every one. But you don't believe that, Sarah said. I believe, the pastor said carefully, that justice and law aren't always the same thing. And I believe that in a town where one man holds all the power, justice becomes whatever that man decides it is. He stood, clearly ending the conversation. I'm sorry about your son. I'm sorry I can't help you more than that. But I have a congregation to protect, and speaking out against Blackwood is a good way to make sure I have no congregation left to serve. They left the church feeling more discouraged than before. Every path they turned down hit the same wall: fear, resignation, the understanding that fighting Blackwood was suicide. As they walked back toward the boarding house, they passed a small cemetery on a hillside overlooking the town. Sarah stopped, staring at the weathered wooden markers. James is buried somewhere out there, she said softly. Alone in these hills. Benjamin doesn't even remember him. In a few years, it'll be like he never existed. Unless, she turned to Martha, her eyes fierce, unless we make his death mean something. Unless we fight. Fight with what? Martha asked, feeling the weight of exhaustion settling over her. We have no money, no influence, no proof of wrongdoing. We have nothing but our anger, and anger doesn't win against power. Maybe not, Sarah admitted, but giving up guarantees we lose. That evening, Eli returned to the boarding house as promised. They gathered in Martha and Samuel's small room, speaking in low voices while Benjamin slept in the corner. I've been asking questions, Eli said without preamble. Carefully. The Golden Promise isn't the first claim Blackwood's acquired through tax default. In the past 2 years, he's taken control of at least 15 claims this way. Always the same pattern: productive claims, sudden tax issues, quick auction, Blackwood's company the only bidder. That can't be legal, Sarah said. It is if no one challenges it, Eli replied. And no one has. The people who lose their claims either take what money Blackwood offers and leave, or they end up in the kind of justifiable incidents the pastor mentioned. Samuel's face had gone pale. You're saying if we fight this, we could end up dead. I'm saying the stakes are higher than just money, Eli said bluntly. Blackwood has built an empire on taking from people who can't fight back. He's got the law, the guns, and the power. Going against him isn't a business decision. It's a war. The room fell silent. Through the thin walls, they could hear the sounds of Gold Ridge at night, music from the saloons, laughter, the occasional gunshot that no one seemed to find unusual. Finally, Martha spoke. You said helping us might help settle your business with Blackwood. What did you mean? Eli looked at her, and in the lamplight his pale eyes seemed to hold shadows that went down forever. 15 years ago, my family had a claim in these hills. Good claim, producing well. One day, while I was in town getting supplies, claim jumpers attacked. Killed my wife, my daughter, my brother. Burned our cabin to the ground. His voice was flat, emotionless, but Martha heard the pain beneath it, old and deep and never fully healed. The sheriff at the time said it was natives, stirred up war parties, got a lot of innocent people killed in retribution. But I knew better. How? Sarah breathed. Because the claim jumpers weren't native, Eli said. They were white men, professional guns. And 3 days after my family died, the claim was sold at auction for unpaid taxes I'd paid in full the month before. Bought by a development company that didn't exist until a week earlier. Understanding dawned in Samuel's face. Blackwood. Blackwood was the front man, Eli confirmed, but he wasn't alone. There were 3 others. Together, they built an empire on blood and lies. Used the Indian wars they manufactured as cover to take land, consolidate power, eliminate anyone who stood in their way. He paused. I've spent 15 years tracking them, learning their methods, waiting for the right moment. And now? Martha asked, though she thought she already knew the answer. Now, Eli said quietly, I'm going to take everything from them. Their power, their money, their lives. One way or another, they're going to pay for what they did. The words should have frightened Martha. This quiet, courteous man was calmly discussing murder. But instead, she felt something else. A fierce, dark satisfaction that someone was finally willing to stand against the injustice that had taken her son. We want to help, Sarah said firmly. No. Eli's voice was sharp. This isn't your fight. Blackwood took your claim through legal manipulation. What he did to my family was murder. There's a difference. Is there? Samuel asked bitterly. He stole from us the same as he stole from you. Maybe he used different methods, but the result is the same. We've lost everything. You've lost money and hope, Eli said. You can rebuild those. I lost people I loved. There's no rebuilding that. There's only evening the scales. He stood. I'll help you gather evidence if you want to try the legal route. I'll even help you negotiate a better deal with Blackwood, but I won't let you get involved in what I'm planning. Too many innocent people have died already because of him. He left before they could argue, his footsteps fading down the hallway. Martha sat in the silence that followed, her mind churning. Everything Eli had said made sense. They should take whatever money they could get and leave. Start over somewhere else, somewhere safer. That was the smart choice, the sensible choice. But sense and justice weren't the same thing, and she was tired, so tired, of watching powerful men take whatever they wanted while good people suffered. We should sleep on it, Samuel said finally. Morning might bring different perspective. But morning brought something else entirely. They woke to shouting in the street, the sound of running feet and panicked voices. Samuel rushed to the window, pulled back the curtain, and went rigid. What is it? Martha asked, joining him. What she saw made her blood run cold. A body hung from the scaffolding of a building under construction on Main Street. Even from a distance, she could see it was a man, his neck bent at an unnatural angle, swaying slightly in the morning breeze. A crowd had gathered, but they kept their distance, as if the corpse carried some contagion. "Who is it?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. Samuel's face was ashen. "I can't tell from here, but there's something pinned to his chest. A note, or—" They dressed quickly and joined the crowd in the street. Deputy Garrett was already there, standing with his arms crossed, his expression carefully neutral. Sheriff Morrison, a paunchy man in his 50s with cold eyes, was examining the body with clinical detachment. The dead man was one of Blackwood's associates. Martha recognized him from the development company office. His face was purple, eyes bulging, but what drew everyone's attention was the paper pinned to his chest with a knife. Sheriff Morrison pulled it free, read it, and his expression darkened. He showed it to Garrett, who went pale. "What does it say?" Someone in the crowd called out. Morrison turned to face them, holding up the paper. In neat, precise handwriting, it read, "4 men built an empire on murder and lies. 1 down, 3 to go. Justice comes for you all." The crowd erupted in frightened whispers. Martha felt Sarah grab her arm, heard Samuel's sharp intake of breath. But her eyes went to the edge of the crowd, where Eli Cross stood watching, his face expressionless, his pale eyes cold as winter sky. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that the war had just begun. The crowd dispersed slowly, people backing away from the hanging corpse, as if proximity to death might mark them as accomplices. Sheriff Morrison barked orders at his deputies, establishing a perimeter that no one wanted to cross anyway. The body would hang there for hours, Martha realized, a message as much as a murder scene. She searched for Eli in the thinning crowd, but he'd vanished like smoke and wind. Samuel gripped her elbow, steering her and Sarah back toward the boarding house, his face carved from stone. "We need to leave," he said once they were inside, his voice low and urgent. "Today. Now. Before this town tears itself apart." "Papa," Sarah started, but he cut her off. "Don't you see what's happening? Someone just executed one of Blackwood's men in the middle of Main Street. You think Blackwood's going to let that stand? You think the sheriff won't come down hard on anyone even remotely suspicious?" He looked at Martha, desperation in his eyes. "Eli was with us. People saw us together. When they start looking for whoever did this, they're going to remember strangers arriving in town at exactly the right time." He was right, Martha knew. The timing was damning, but something in her resisted the urge to run. "We didn't do anything wrong." "That won't matter," Samuel said flatly. "Innocent people hang in places like this. You said it yourself yesterday. Justice is whatever Blackwood decides it is." A knock at the door froze them all. Samuel moved to answer it, one hand on the knife at his belt, but it was only the German widow, her weathered face creased with worry. "There are men asking questions," she said quietly. "Going door to door, asking about strangers, about anyone new to town in the last week." Her eyes held warning. "I told them nothing, but others will talk." "Thank you," Martha said, pressing coins into the woman's calloused hand, more than they could afford, but gratitude had a price. After she left, they sat in tense silence. Benjamin played with his wooden blocks in the corner, mercifully oblivious to the danger settling over them like fog. Through the window, Martha could hear boots on the boardwalk, voices asking questions, doors opening and closing. The knock, when it came again, was harder, more insistent. Samuel opened the door to find Deputy Garrett filling the frame, another deputy behind him, a lean man with a face like a hatchet and eyes that missed nothing. "Mr. Carter," Garrett said, his voice carrying false politeness. "Need to ask you folks a few questions." "Of course," Samuel said, stepping aside. "Though I'm not sure how we can help. We only arrived 2 days ago." "That's what makes you interesting," the lean deputy said, pushing past Garrett into the room. His eyes swept over them, cataloging, assessing. "Murder happens the same week new people show up. Makes a man wonder about coincidence." "We had nothing to do with that," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "We came here to claim my late husband's mine, that's all." As Garrett's expression shifted to something like sympathy, practiced, calculated. "We heard about that. Heard you met with Mr. Blackwood yesterday. Must have been disappointing, learning the claim was already sold." "Disappointing," Samuel said carefully, "but not surprising. We understand how territorial law works." "Do you?" The lean deputy stepped closer to Samuel. "Because from where I stand, you had motive. Blackwood took something you thought was yours. His associate ends up dead the next day. That's what we call suspicious timing. Thomas Whitmore wasn't just Blackwood's associate, Garrett added, watching them closely. He was the man who handled all the development company's claim acquisitions, including your son's mine. He paused, letting that sink in. The man who signed the papers transferring the Golden Promise to Blackwood, that was Whitmore. Martha felt the trap closing. They wanted to see rage, wanted evidence of motive. She kept her face neutral, but beside her, Sarah had gone pale. "We didn't know that," Martha said quietly. "We never met Mr. Whitmore. Only saw Mr. Blackwood." "What about your friend?" the lean deputy asked. "The one who rode in with you. Eli Cross, is it? Where's he?" "We don't know," Samuel said truthfully. "He's not our friend exactly, just a man we met on the road who offered to ride along for safety." "Convenient," Garrett said. "Tell me, did Mr. Cross seem interested in your meeting with Blackwood? Did he ask questions about it afterward?" "He offered to help us gather information about the claim," Sarah said, "to see if there were legal options. That's all." The lean deputy smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Legal options." "Right. And where might we find Mr. Cross to ask him about these legal options?" "I don't know," Samuel said. "Like I said, he's not really with us, just a fellow traveler." Garrett and his partner exchanged glances. Some silent communication passed between them. Finally, Garrett nodded. "If you see Mr. Cross, you tell him Sheriff Morrison wants to talk to him. Official business. And if you folks are thinking about leaving town anytime soon, you might want to reconsider. We like to know where witnesses are, in case we have more questions." It wasn't a request. It was a cage disguised as courtesy. After they left, Martha sank onto the bed, her legs suddenly unsteady. "They're going to blame Eli. Pin this on him and anyone associated with him." "Let them," Samuel said harshly. "He brought this on himself. We warned him. We told him we wanted no part of whatever vendetta he's carrying. But he went ahead anyway, and now we're caught in it." "He's trying to get justice," Sarah said softly. "For his family. For all the people Blackwood has destroyed." "Justice." Samuel's laugh was bitter. "That wasn't justice hanging from that scaffold. That was murder. Cold, calculated murder. And I don't care what Blackwood did 15 years ago. Killing his men won't bring Eli's family back. It'll just create more bodies." Martha wanted to argue, but the words stuck in her throat. Samuel was right. Eli had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, but she also understood the mathematics of frontier justice. Sometimes the only way to stop a man like Blackwood was to make him afraid, and fear required blood. They stayed in the boarding house for the rest of the day, prisoners of their own caution. Through the window, Martha watched Goldridge transform. The bustling commerce of the morning gave way to watchful silence. Deputies patrolled the streets in pairs. Businesses closed early. People hurried home before dark, hunching their shoulders against some invisible threat. By evening, the tension had grown thick enough to choke on. Samuel paced the small room like a caged animal, while Sarah tried to keep Benjamin calm, and Martha stared at the walls, wondering how everything had fallen apart so quickly. The knock at sunset made them all jump. But when Samuel cracked the door, it was Eli standing there, hat in hand, looking no different than he had that morning, calm, composed, untouched by the chaos swirling around him. "Don't!" Samuel hissed, trying to close the door. But Eli's boot was already in the gap. "5 minutes," Eli said quietly. "That's all I need." Against his better judgment, Samuel let him in. Eli moved to the window, checked the street below, then turned to face them. "You need to take Blackwood's offer," he said without preamble. "Tomorrow morning, take the $500 and leave Gold Ridge." "Because of what you did?" Samuel's voice shook with anger. "Because you murdered that man and made us look like accomplices?" "I didn't murder anyone," Eli said, his voice flat. "Whitmore was executed. There's a difference." "Not to the law," Sarah said. "Not to the sheriff who's looking for someone to hang." "The sheriff's looking for a scapegoat," Eli corrected. "Someone easy to blame, easy to convict, easy to hang so Blackwood feels like justice was served. I won't be that scapegoat, but if you stay here, you might be." Martha studied his face, the careful control, the absence of guilt or fear. "You're not going to stop, are you? The note said 4 men. You've killed one. You're going after the others." "Yes," Eli said simply. "Who are they?" she asked. "Besides Blackwood?" Eli was quiet for a moment, his pale eyes distant. Blackwood built the empire, but he had partners. Charles Hendricks owns the land office. He's the one who manipulates the records, creates the false tax liens. Judge Warren Crane presides over the territorial court. He makes sure any legal challenges disappear. And Sheriff Morrison enforces it all, makes sure anyone who fights back ends up dead or disappeared. He paused. Together, they've created a perfect machine for stealing land and crushing anyone who resists. They've been running it for 15 years. And you're going to kill them all, Samuel said, not quite a question. I'm going to give them the justice they've denied everyone else, Eli said. But that's my burden to carry, not yours. You came here for a fresh start. Take Blackwood's money and find it somewhere else. What about our son's claim? Sarah asked. What about making his death mean something? Your son's death already means something, Eli said gently. He built a dream in these hills. He loved his family enough to chase that dream even when it killed him. That matters, regardless of what happens to a piece of land. He moved toward the door. Take the money. Leave tomorrow. Don't look back. And if we don't? Martha heard herself ask. Eli turned, and in the lamplight, she saw something in his expression that chilled her. Not anger, not threat, but a cold certainty that was somehow worse. Then you'll watch this town burn, he said quietly, and you might burn with it. He left before they could respond, slipping out into the darkness as silently as he'd arrived. That night, none of them slept. Martha lay awake listening to the sounds of Goldridge holding its breath, waiting for the next death, the next message, the next strike in a war most people didn't even realize they were fighting. Morning brought another body. This time it was Charles Hendricks, the land office clerk. They found him in his office, slumped over his massive ledger, a knife buried between his shoulder blades. The ledger was open to a specific page, the one showing the Golden Promise claim transfer. Someone had circled the entry in red ink, had written in the margin, "Built on lies." The note pinned to Hendrick's back was similar to the first. 2 down, 2 to go. The reckoning continues. The town exploded into panic. Businesses shuttered. People barricaded themselves in their homes. Sheriff Morrison declared martial law, imposed a curfew, authorized his deputies to shoot anyone suspicious on sight. The message was clear. Blackwood's empire was at war, and everyone in Gold Ridge was either with him or against him. By midday, the deputies had rounded up every stranger in town, drifters, recent arrivals, anyone without established roots. They were held in the town hall, questioned one by one. The Carter family was among them. They sat on hard benches in a room that stank of sweat and fear, surrounded by 24 other people who'd had the misfortune of being new to Gold Ridge at the wrong time. Benjamin clung to Sarah, his small face pressed against her shoulder, sensing the danger even if he didn't understand it. One by one, people were called into a back room. Some came out after a few minutes, pale but unharmed. Others took longer. One man came out with a split lip and a blackening eye, stumbling as the deputies shoved him back to his bench. When Samuel's name was called, Martha tried to stand with him, but a deputy pushed her back down. "Just him!" She watched her husband disappear through the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Beside her, Sarah gripped her hand so tightly it hurt. Finally, Samuel emerged. His face was drawn, his jaw clenched, but he seemed unharmed. He sat beside Martha without speaking, staring straight ahead. "What did they ask?" she whispered. "Everything. Where we're from. Why we came. What we know about Eli Cross." He paused. "They're scared. Not of the murders. They're scared of what the murders mean. Someone is dismantling Blackwood's operation piece by piece, and they can't stop it." "Did they hurt you?" "Not yet, but Morrison made it clear. If we don't cooperate fully, if we're hiding anything about Cross, we'll regret it." He looked at her, and she saw the calculation in his eyes. "Martha, we need to tell them. Tell them everything we know about Eli, where we met him, what he said, his plans. It's the only way to protect ourselves." "You want to turn him in?" Sarah hissed, leaning across Martha. "After what he told us? After we know why he's doing this?" "He's a murderer," Samuel said flatly. "I don't care what his reasons are. He's putting us in danger, putting Benjamin in danger. I won't sacrifice my family for his revenge. Before Sarah could argue, Martha's name was called. She stood on shaking legs, felt the deputy's hand on her elbow. Not quite rough, but firm enough to make clear she had no choice. The back room was small, windowless. Sheriff Morrison sat behind a battered desk, Garrett standing beside him. The lean deputy from yesterday leaned against the wall, picking his teeth with a knife. "Mrs. Carter," Morrison said, gesturing to a chair, "please sit." She sat, folding her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. Morrison studied her with cold, assessing eyes. "Your husband's been very cooperative, told us all about meeting Eli Cross on the road, about how Cross offered to help with your claim situation, about his interest in Blackwood." He leaned forward. "What he couldn't tell us is where Cross is now. Can you?" "No," Martha said truthfully. "We haven't seen him since yesterday evening." "But he came to your room last night," Garrett said. "The widow saw him, heard voices through the wall." Martha's mind raced. Denying it would be pointless. "He came to tell us to take Mr. Blackwood's offer and leave town. He said what's happening here isn't our fight." "What did he mean by that?" Morrison asked. "What's happening here?" "The murders," Martha said carefully. "He said there would be more, that we should leave before we got caught up in it." The lean deputy pushed off the wall, came to stand beside Morrison's desk. "He confessed to the murders?" "No, he just said we should leave." "But you knew," Morrison said softly. "You knew he was planning something. You knew he had a vendetta against Blackwood and his associates. And you didn't think to mention that to the law?" The trap was springing shut. Martha chose her words carefully. "We didn't know anything for certain. Mr. Cross told us he'd been in Gold Ridge before, that he'd lost family here, but he never said he planned to hurt anyone." "His family," Garrett said. "Tell us about that." So Martha did, laying out what Eli had told them, the claim jumpers, the massacre, the false tax sale. As she spoke, she watched Morrison's expression harden. "That's a hell of a story," he said when she finished. "Problem is, it's just that, a story. No proof, no evidence. Just the word of a man who's now killed 2 people and promises to kill more." "What if it's true?" Martha asked quietly. "What if Blackwood and the others did murder his family? What if everything he said about how they operate is real?" Morrison's eyes went flat and cold. "Even if it were true, and I'm not saying it is, that doesn't give Cross the right to take the law into his own hands. We have courts for a reason, legal processes, civilization." "Like the civilization that stole our son's claim?" The words were out before Martha could stop them. "Like the legal process that lets Blackwood take whatever he wants and call it legitimate?" The room went silent. Morrison and Garrett exchanged glances. The lean deputy smiled, a thin, dangerous expression. "Careful, Mrs. Carter," Morrison said softly. "You're starting to sound like an accomplice, like maybe you're more involved in this than you're letting on." Fear spiked through her, but Martha forced herself to meet his eyes. "I'm involved in trying to get justice for my dead son. That's all. We came here with hope and legal documents. We found a town where hope doesn't matter, and legal documents mean whatever Blackwood wants them to mean." She paused. "Maybe Mr. Cross is wrong to do what he's doing, but I understand why he's doing it." Morrison leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Understanding murder and condoning it are mighty close, Mrs. Carter, close enough that a judge might not see much difference." The threat was clear. Martha said nothing, knowing that anything she added would only dig the hole deeper. Finally, Morrison waved his hand dismissively. "You can go, but you and your family aren't leaving Gold Ridge until this is resolved. Consider yourselves material witnesses. If you try to leave town, you'll be arrested. If you see or hear from Eli Cross, you report it immediately. If you don't..." He let the sentence hang, unfinished but clear. Martha stood on trembling legs and walked out. In the main room, she found Samuel and Sarah waiting, their faces tight with worry. Benjamin was dozing against Sarah's shoulder, exhausted by fear he couldn't name. They were released an hour later with strict instructions. Stay in town, stay visible, stay away from trouble. As they walked back to the boarding house through streets emptied by curfew and fear, Martha felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her. That evening, as they tried to force down a cold supper, A commotion outside drew them to the window. A crowd was gathering near the bank, smaller than before, people too frightened to cluster but too curious to stay away. Someone had painted words across the bank's brick facade in letters 3 feet tall, built on blood. Stolen from the innocent. Justice comes for thieves. Below it, a list of names. All the people who'd lost claims to Blackwood's company over the past 5 years. James Carter's name was there, third from the top. He's escalating, Samuel said quietly, making it public, forcing people to see what they've been ignoring. Martha read through the list. 23 names, 23 families destroyed. How many of them were still in Goldridge, living in poverty, while their stolen claims made Blackwood rich? How many had left broken? How many had died in justifiable incidents when they tried to fight back? He's going to get himself killed, Sarah said, and maybe us along with him. But Martha wasn't sure anymore which outcome frightened her more, Eli's death or his success. Because if he succeeded in destroying Blackwood's empire, what would rise in its place? Would it be justice? Or just a different kind of tyranny? That night, unable to sleep, she slipped out of the boarding house and walked the empty streets despite the curfew. She needed air, needed space to think. The town felt like a powder keg, one spark away from explosion. She found herself at the cemetery where Sarah had stood days earlier. In the moonlight, the wooden markers cast long shadows. She walked among them, reading names, dates, abbreviated lives carved into weathered wood. You shouldn't be out here alone. Martha spun to find Eli standing a few yards away, materializing from darkness like a ghost. She should have been frightened, but she felt only weariness. Neither should you, she said. Half the town is looking for you. The other half is too terrified to care. I know. He moved closer, and she saw that he looked different, harder somehow, as if each death he dealt had carved away another piece of whatever softness he'd once possessed. I came to make sure you were all right. Heard Morrison questioned you pretty hard. We told him what you said about your family, about Blackwood. She paused. He didn't believe it or didn't care. I know that too. Eli looked past her at the cemetery, his expression distant. My daughter would be 23 now if she'd lived. Same age as your Sarah. I think about that sometimes, what she would have become, who she would have married, what kind of life she would have built. He fell silent for a moment. Then I remember she never got the chance to find out because 4 men decided her life was worth less than gold. So you're making them pay, Martha said. I'm making them answer, Eli corrected. There's a difference. Payment suggests they can settle the debt. They can't. No amount of blood will bring my family back. But they can answer for what they did. They can face what they are before they die. And the town? All these people caught in the middle? Eli turned to look at her directly. The town has been caught in the middle for 15 years, Mrs. Carter. Caught between Blackwood's greed and their own fear. I'm not creating that situation. I'm exposing it, forcing everyone to see what they've been pretending doesn't exist. His voice softened slightly. I know that's hard. I know it's dangerous. That's why I told you to leave. We can't leave, Martha said. Morrison forbade it. We're trapped here until this is over. Something flickered in Eli's eyes. Regret, maybe, or calculation. Then stay invisible. Keep your heads down. Don't take sides publicly. He started to turn away, then stopped. And Mrs. Carter, when this is done, when the truth comes out, you might want to reconsider that offer from Blackwood. The man who made it won't be around to honor it anymore. He disappeared into the darkness before she could ask what he meant. Martha stood alone among the dead, feeling the cold night air settle over her like a shroud. Somewhere in Gold Ridge, Blackwood and his surviving partners were barricaded behind locked doors and armed guards, waiting for death to find them. Somewhere else, frightened people huddled in their homes, praying the violence would pass them by. And somewhere in between, a man with nothing left to lose was hunting monsters, convinced that vengeance and justice were the same thing. Martha didn't know which side she was on anymore. She only knew that Gold Ridge was about to burn, and when the ashes settled, nothing would ever be the same. She walked back to the boarding house through streets that felt haunted, every shadow a threat, every sound a warning. When she slipped back into their room, Samuel was awake, sitting by the window with his rifle across his knees. Where were you? His voice was tight with fear and anger. Walking, thinking. She sat beside him, suddenly exhausted. I saw Eli. Samuel's hands tightened on the rifle. And you didn't run, didn't call for help. What would be the point? Martha asked quietly. He's not our enemy, Samuel. He's just a man trying to balance scales that have been tilted for too long. He's a killer, Samuel said flatly, and every person he kills puts us in more danger. We were already in danger, Martha countered. The moment we arrived in this town with hope and legal papers, we were in danger. Blackwood would have taken everything from us, whether Eli was here or not. At least this way, someone's fighting back. Samuel stared at her, and she saw something shift in his expression. Not agreement exactly, but a kind of bitter understanding. You want him to succeed. I want justice, Martha said. Real justice, not the kind Blackwood buys with lawyers and corrupt officials. If Eli's the only one willing to deliver it, she trailed off, unable to finish the thought. They sat in silence as false dawn painted the sky gray. Outside, Gold Ridge remained locked down, waiting for the next blow to fall. It came at noon. Judge Warren Crane was found in his chambers at the courthouse, slumped in his chair behind his massive desk. Unlike the others, he hadn't been killed quickly. The coroner would later report multiple wounds, precise, methodical, inflicted over what must have been hours. Before he died, someone had forced him to write a confession. The document was 3 pages long, detailing 15 years of corruption in meticulous legal language. Every falsified ruling, every dismissed case, every piece of evidence he'd suppressed or destroyed. Names, dates, amounts. It read like a ledger of betrayal, each entry another life destroyed in service to Blackwood's empire. The confession was nailed to the courthouse door for everyone to see. By the time Sheriff Morrison arrived to tear it down, half the town had already read it. Copies appeared overnight, pasted on walls, slipped under doors, left on tables in saloons. The truth Blackwood had spent 15 years burying was suddenly everywhere, impossible to ignore. Martha read one of the copies in the boarding house common room, Sarah reading over her shoulder. The document mentioned James Carter specifically, noted that his claim challenge had been dismissed without hearing, that evidence of paid taxes had been excluded from the record, that the sale to Blackwood's company had been rushed through despite procedural irregularities. He fought for it, Sarah said softly, tears streaming down her face. James tried to fight them legally, and they destroyed the evidence, made it disappear like it never existed. Like he never existed, Martha added, her own voice breaking. She thought of her son dying alone in these hills, betrayed not just by Blackwood, but by the very system that was supposed to protect him. The rage that kindled in her chest was dark and hot and dangerous. The town exploded, not in violence, not yet, but in something potentially more dangerous, open rebellion. People who'd been silent for years suddenly found their voices. Miners who'd lost claims confronted the sheriff in the street, demanding answers. Business owners who'd been squeezed by Blackwood's monopoly stopped paying his inflated fees. The machinery of oppression, so carefully maintained, began to shudder and crack. Morrison responded with force. Deputies arrested anyone who spoke too loudly, anyone who questioned too openly. The jail filled with agitators and troublemakers, men and women whose only crime was believing that Crane's confession meant something, that justice might actually be possible. But force, Martha realized, only worked when people were afraid, and fear was giving way to fury. She saw it in the faces around town, the set jaws, the hard eyes, the way people stopped flinching when deputies passed. The balance of power was shifting, and everyone could feel it. Blackwood felt it too. He barricaded himself in his office above the bank, surrounded by armed guards. No more meetings with petitioners, no more public appearances. The man who'd ruled Gold Ridge like a king had become a prisoner in his own fortress. On the 3rd day after Crane's death, Martha was returning from the general store when she saw a crowd gathering in front of the bank. Not the fearful, hesitant clusters of before. This was different, larger, angrier. People pushed forward, shouting demands. Bring him out! Let him answer for what he's done. Justice for the stolen claims. Deputies formed a line in front of the bank's entrance, rifles ready. Garrett stood at their center, his face grim. The crowd pressed closer, and Martha felt the electricity in the air, that terrible moment before violence when anything could tip the balance. Then a shot rang out. Everyone froze. The sound had come from inside the bank. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the bank's door opened and one of Blackwood's guards stumbled out, his shirt front dark with blood. He took 3 steps and collapsed. The crowd surged backward, and in that moment of chaos, Martha saw him. Eli Cross, standing on the bank's roof, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. In his hand, a rifle. His voice carried clearly over the panicked crowd. "Marcus Blackwood," he called out, "come out and face what you've done. Face the people you've stolen from, or die hiding like the coward you are." Garrett raised his rifle, but before he could fire, someone in the crowd grabbed the barrel, pulled it down. Others joined in, surrounding the deputies, not attacking but preventing them from acting. The town was taking sides, and the law was on the wrong one. A window shattered on the second floor of the bank. Blackwood's voice, raw with fear and rage, echoed out. "You're a murderer, Cross, a killer. These people see what you are." "They see what I am," Eli called back. "Do they see what you are? Do they know about the families you destroyed? The people you killed to build your empire? The blood money you've hidden behind legal papers and corrupt judges?" "I built this town," Blackwood shouted. "I brought civilization to these hills, jobs, prosperity, order. Everything good about Gold Ridge came from me." "Built on graves," Eli said quietly, but somehow his voice carried. "Built on stolen land and murdered innocents. Built on 15 years of lies." He paused. "But we're done lying now. Time for truth." What happened next would be debated for years in Gold Ridge. Some said Eli fired first. Others swore it was Blackwood's guards. But in the end, it didn't matter who pulled which trigger, only that the powder keg finally exploded. Gunfire erupted from the bank's windows. Eli dropped behind the roof's false front, returning fire with methodical precision. The crowd scattered, people diving for cover behind water troughs and wagons. Deputies tried to restore order, but the town was beyond their control now. Martha grabbed Sarah and ran, pulling her into an alley as bullets whined overhead. They crouched behind a stack of crates, hearts hammering, while the street became a battlefield. The fight lasted minutes, but felt like hours. When the smoke cleared, 3 of Blackwood's guards lay dead in the street. 2 more were wounded. Garrett had taken a bullet to the shoulder and was being dragged to safety by his men. And Eli Cross had vanished like smoke, leaving only spent brass and empty rooftops behind. But the real damage wasn't the bodies or the broken windows. It was what came after. As the crowd regrouped, as fear turned back to anger, someone threw a rock at the bank's window. Then another. Then a torch. "No!" Garrett shouted, trying to push through the crowd. "Stop! This is still the law's jurisdiction." But nobody was listening anymore. The bank's ground floor windows shattered under a hail of stones. Smoke began to curl from broken panes as the torch caught something flammable inside. Martha watched in horrified fascination as 15 years of oppression transformed into 15 minutes of chaos. People who'd been silent were screaming now. People who'd been beaten down were tearing down. The civilization Blackwood claimed to have built was revealing its foundation of sand. Sheriff Morrison appeared with reinforcements, forcing the crowd back at gunpoint. Volunteers formed a bucket brigade, fighting the fire before it could spread to neighboring buildings. Order was restored, but barely. The message was clear. Gold Ridge was a town balanced on a knife's edge. That night, martial law became absolute. Anyone on the streets after dark would be shot on sight. Anyone gathering in groups larger than 3 would be arrested. The town that had been a prison before became a tomb, silent and sealed. But in that silence, something was growing. Martha felt it in whispered conversations, in the way people looked at each other with new understanding. Crane's confession had opened eyes. Eli's war had shown that Blackwood could bleed, and the riot had proven that together, people had power. The question was what they'd do with it. She got her answer 2 days later when a delegation of townspeople appeared at the boarding house. There were 8 of them, miners, merchants, a lawyer from Denver who'd recently arrived. Their spokesman was a grizzled prospector named McGill, who'd lost his claim to Blackwood 3 years earlier. "Mrs. Carter," he said, removing his hat, "we'd like to talk to you about your son's claim, about all the stolen claims, about making things right." They gathered in the common room, keeping their voices low. McGill laid out papers on the table, copies of Crane's confession, affidavits from people who'd been cheated, evidence that had been hidden or destroyed. "We want to file a class action suit," the Denver lawyer explained. His name was Ashford, and he had the careful intensity of a man who believed in the law, even when the law failed people. Use Crane's confession as evidence. Demand that all claims acquired through fraud or corruption be returned to their rightful owners. The territorial court won't hear it, Samuel said flatly. Blackwood owns them. He owned one judge, Ashford corrected, Crane, but the Chief Justice in Denver is clean, known for it actually. If we can get the case before him, we have a chance. A small chance, McGill added grimly, but more than we had before Cross started killing people. That man opened a door. Now we're trying to walk through it legally before more blood gets spilled. Martha studied the papers, her heart quickening. What do you need from us? Your son's documentation, his original claim filing, his tax receipts, any correspondence he had with the land office. You've got the best paper trail of anyone. If we can prove James Carter's claim was stolen, it sets precedent for all the others. Sarah was already moving, pulling their carefully preserved documents from the trunk where they'd been kept safe through 3 months of travel. She spread them on the table, and Ashford's eyes lit up. This is good, he breathed. This is very good. Dated, witnessed, official seals. This is ironclad proof that your son was current on all obligations when his claim was seized. He looked up at them. With your permission, I'd like to make this the centerpiece of our case. James Carter versus the Gold Ridge Development Company. We win this, we win them all. And if we lose, Samuel asked, then we're no worse off than before, McGill said. Except Blackwood will know we're willing to fight. That might count for something. Martha looked at Sarah, saw her daughter's jaw set with determination, saw the fire in her eyes that reminded Martha painfully of James. Then she looked at Samuel and saw him nod slowly. Do it, Martha said. Use whatever you need. James deserves justice. They all do. The room erupted in quiet celebration, handshakes, grateful smiles. For the first time since arriving in Gold Ridge, Martha felt something like hope. But hope, she was learning, was a dangerous thing in a town at war. The next morning, they found Sheriff Morrison's body hanging from the same scaffolding where Whitmore had died. Unlike the others, there was no note, no message, just a corpse swaying in the dawn wind and a town waking to the realization that even the law itself wasn't safe. Garrett found Martha in the street, his arm in a sling from the shoulder wound, his face pale with fury and fear. Where is he? I don't know, Martha said truthfully. You're lying. You've been in contact with Cross from the start. You've been helping him. We've been trying to survive, Martha cut him off sharply. That's all. We didn't come here for this. We came for a mine that was stolen from us. Everything else is your town's nightmare, not ours. Morrison had a wife, Garrett said, his voice breaking slightly. 3 children. Whatever crimes you think he committed, he was still a man, still had a family who loved him. So did James, Sarah said quietly, appearing beside her mother. So did every person Blackwood destroyed. Where was Morrison's mercy then? Where was the law's protection? Garrett stared at her, and Martha saw the struggle in his face, duty against doubt, loyalty against truth. Finally, he turned away, shoulders slumped. Stay out of trouble, Mrs. Carter, he said without looking back. For your own sake and your family's. This is going to get worse before it gets better. He was right. By afternoon, the town was ungovernable. With Morrison dead, the deputies had no clear leadership. Some tried to maintain order. Others abandoned their posts, fleeing Gold Ridge before they became the next target. Looting broke out in the commercial district. Fights erupted over old grudges that had nothing to do with Blackwood or stolen claims. And through it all, one question echoed. Where was Marcus Blackwood? The answer came at sunset. Eli Cross appeared on the roof of the courthouse, the same building where Crane had been killed, where his confession had been posted. He wasn't hiding anymore, wasn't working in shadows. He stood in plain view as the town gathered below, drawn by some collective instinct that this was the moment everything would be decided. Marcus Blackwood, Eli's voice carried across the square. I know you can hear me. I know you're watching. Time to end this. For a long moment, nothing. Then Blackwood's voice emerged from a window in the bank building, amplified somehow so the whole town could hear. You've murdered 4 people, Cross. 4 men who built this town, who brought order and prosperity to a lawless wilderness. And for what? Some vendetta from 15 years ago? Some imagined slight? Imagined. Eli's voice was cold. My wife was real. My daughter was real. My brother was real. The bullets that killed them were real. The fire that burned our home was real. And the men who gave the orders, that was you and your partners. You murdered my family so you could steal our land. Then you blamed it on natives and started a war that killed hundreds of innocent people. The crowd stirred, whispers spreading like wildfire. This was more than anyone had known. Not just corruption and theft, but massacre and genocide dressed up as frontier justice. You have no proof, Blackwood said, but his voice had lost its certainty. I have your confession, Eli said. Not written, not legal, but I'll have it before this is done. You're going to tell this town what you did, all of it, or I'm going to burn everything you've built to ash. You're one man against an empire, Tumbum. I'm one man with nothing to lose, Eli interrupted. And you're already lost, Blackwood. Look around. Your guards are dead or gone. Your partners are dead. Your sheriff is dead. Your power was built on fear, but fear only works while people believe you're untouchable. I've proven you bleed. Now the whole town knows it. Silence fell over Gold Ridge. Every eye was on that bank window, waiting. Finally, Blackwood spoke again, and this time his voice carried exhaustion. What do you want, Cross? The truth, Eli said simply. Stand in that square and tell these people how you built your empire. Tell them about the land you stole, the people you killed, the lives you destroyed. Face what you are before you die. And if I do, you'll let me live? Eli was quiet for a long moment. No, he said finally, but I'll make it quick. That's more mercy than you showed my family. Another long silence. Martha held her breath, feeling the entire town balanced on this moment. What would Blackwood choose, defiance or confession, pride or survival? The bank's door opened. Marcus Blackwood emerged, flanked by his two remaining guards. He walked slowly toward the center of the square, and the crowd parted before him like water. In the fading light, he looked diminished. Still tall, still imposing, but somehow lesser than the legend that had ruled Gold Ridge for so long. He stopped in the center of the square and looked up at Eli Cross on the courthouse roof. You want the truth? Here it is. He turned to address the crowd. 15 years ago, this valley was nothing. Rough camps, lawless men, fortunes made and lost overnight. Someone had to bring order. Someone had to create structure. By murdering families, someone in the crowd shouted. Blackwood's jaw tightened. There were incidents. Claim disputes that got violent. Some people refused to accept legal authority, refused to recognize legitimate ownership. We did what was necessary to establish order. You did what was profitable, Eli called down. Tell them about the Soren claim. Tell them how you wanted the land but couldn't buy it legally. Tell them how you hired guns to kill everyone there and blame it on natives. Blackwood's face had gone pale. That's not... I didn't order anyone killed. The claim jumpers acted on their own. Liars make poor confessors, Eli said coldly. Try again. This time with truth. And somehow, impossibly, Blackwood did. Maybe it was the weight of the crowd's eyes. Maybe it was the knowledge that he was dead regardless of what he said. Maybe it was just exhaustion after 15 years of lies. The Soren claim was valuable, he said quietly. Gold, timber, water rights. I offered fair price, but Soren wouldn't sell. So I arranged for it to be acquired another way. The men I hired were supposed to scare them off, make them leave. But something went wrong. They killed the family instead. When I found out, He stopped, swallowed. I covered it up. Blamed it on native raiders. Used it to justify military action that cleared the whole valley of potential interference. The crowd's murmur grew to a roar. People who'd lost family in that war, people who'd believed the official story, they were hearing the truth at last, and it was uglier than anyone had imagined. And the claims? Eli pressed. All the families you've destroyed since then? Business, Blackwood said, and some of his old defiance crept back. Legal business. I saw opportunities and took them. If people couldn't maintain their claims properly, couldn't pay their taxes, because you manipulated the records, Eli said, because Hendricks falsified documents and Crane dismissed challenges, and Morrison eliminated anyone who fought back. 15 years of systematic theft dressed up as law. Blackwood looked up at him, and Martha saw something break in his expression, the last remnants of pride or delusion or whatever had let him sleep at night. "Yes," he said simply. "Yes, all of it. Every claim, every family, every lie. I built an empire on their suffering, and I do it again because that's how the frontier works. The strong take from the weak, the smart take from the foolish, and the ruthless outlast everyone else." The admission hung in the air like gun smoke. Martha felt tears on her face, grief and rage and vindication all mixed together. Around her, she saw the same storm of emotions on every face. People finally hearing confirmation of what they'd suspected, feared, known, but couldn't prove. "Thank you," Eli said quietly from the courthouse roof. "That's all I needed." He raised his rifle. "Wait!" Sarah's voice cut through the moment. She pushed through the crowd, stumbling into the square. "Wait, you can't just execute him. Not like this." Eli lowered the rifle slightly, looking down at her. "Why not?" "Because we have his confession now. We have witnesses. We can bring him to trial, make the justice system work properly for once." She gestured at the crowd. "These people deserve to see the law actually serve them. If you kill him, you're just proving that might makes right, that whoever has the gun wins." "The gun already won," Eli said. 15 years ago when Blackwood's hired killers murdered my family. It wins every day someone with power takes from someone without it. I'm just evening the scales." "By becoming what he is," Sarah challenged, "a killer who decides who lives and dies based on his own judgment?" Eli stared at her, and Martha saw the war in his eyes, vengeance against principle, rage against reason. Then Blackwood laughed. It was a broken, bitter sound. "The girl's right, Cross. You kill me, you prove I was right all along. That law and civilization are just pretty words we use to dress up the fact that violence is all that matters." He spread his hands. "But you won't kill me, because you need to believe you're better than me, that you're righteous, justified. A killer, sure, but a righteous killer." "I know what I am," Eli said quietly. "Do you?" Blackwood asked. "Because I see a man who spent 15 years nursing hate, who's murdered 4 people in cold blood, who's torn a town apart, all for revenge he calls justice. We're the same, Cross. The only difference is I admit what I am." The words struck home. Martha saw Eli flinch, saw doubt flicker across his face, and in that moment of hesitation, everything changed. One of Blackwood's guards, seeing his chance, raised his pistol and fired. The shot went wild, missing Eli but shattering tile on the courthouse roof. Eli dropped, rolled, came up firing. The guard went down. The second guard drew his weapon, and suddenly the square erupted in gunfire again. Martha grabbed Sarah, pulled her behind a water trough as bullets whined overhead. Through the chaos, she saw Eli leap from the courthouse roof to an adjacent building, saw Garrett and the remaining deputies moving to engage, saw Blackwood running for the bank, his confession forgotten in the scramble for survival. And she saw something else, saw men in the crowd pulling hidden weapons, saw them moving with coordinated purpose toward the bank. Not Eli's allies, not the deputies, someone else entirely. The realization hit her like cold water. They'd all been so focused on Eli's war with Blackwood that they'd missed the third player entering the game. The armed men moved through the chaos with military precision, cutting through the panicked crowd toward the bank. Martha counted at least a dozen, all wearing similar dark coats, all carrying rifles that looked expensive and well-maintained. These weren't townspeople or desperate miners. These were professionals. "Samuel!" she shouted, spotting her husband across the square. He was sheltering Benjamin behind a wagon, his own rifle raised but not firing. He saw her, saw Sarah, and his face went white with fear. The gunfire intensified. Garrett and his deputies were pinned down near the courthouse, trading shots with someone Martha couldn't see. Eli had disappeared again, though occasional rifle cracks from the rooftops suggested he was still in the fight. And the armed men reached the bank's entrance, kicked in the door that Blackwood had barely managed to close behind him. "We need to get out of here," Sarah said, her voice shaking but steady. "Now, while everyone's distracted." But Martha found herself rooted in place, watching the bank. Something about those men bothered her, the way they moved, the coordination of their attack. This wasn't random violence, this was a plan. The answer came minutes later when the armed men emerged from the bank, dragging a struggling Marcus Blackwood between them. His face was bloodied, his expensive suit torn. Behind them, smoke began to curl from the bank's windows. "People of Gold Ridge!" The voice belonged to a tall man with silver hair and a face that might have been handsome if not for the cruelty in his eyes. He stood on the bank's steps, one hand gripping Blackwood's collar. "My name is Clayton Vance. Some of you may have heard of me." Martha had. Everyone on the frontier had. Clayton Vance ran the largest private security company west of the Mississippi, hired guns, strikebreakers, claim enforcers. He was a businessman who dealt in violence, and his prices were high enough that only the wealthiest could afford him. "Mr. Blackwood here hired my company 3 days ago," Vance continued, his voice carrying easily over the dying gunfire. "Hired us to protect him from the outlaw calling himself Eli Cross. We arrived this afternoon, just in time to witness Mr. Blackwood's rather illuminating confession." He smiled, but there was no humor in it. "A confession that changes the terms of our contract considerably." Blackwood tried to speak, but one of Vance's men struck him hard across the face. "You see," Vance said, "my company has certain standards. We don't work for murderers who prey on innocent families. We don't protect men who orchestrate massacres and blame them on natives. Mr. Blackwood failed to mention these details when he hired us." He paused, looking out over the crowd. "So we've decided to terminate our contract and collect what we're owed in a different way." The crowd murmured, confused. Martha felt dread settling in her stomach like ice. "This bank," Vance gestured behind him, "contains considerable wealth, gold, currency, property deeds, all acquired through Mr. Blackwood's criminal enterprise. Since the law in Gold Ridge is apparently non-existent, and since Mr. Blackwood has confessed to building his empire through theft and murder, I'm claiming these assets as payment for services rendered." His smile widened. "Call it frontier justice." "That's robbery," Garrett called out from his position near the courthouse. His voice was weak from blood loss, but anger gave it strength. "You can't just take—" "Can't I?" Vance interrupted. "Who's going to stop me? You? With what authority? Your sheriff is dead, your deputies are scattered. The man who owned this town just confessed to 15 years of murder and theft. There is no law here anymore. There's just power." He looked around the square. "And I have more guns than anyone else." It was true. Vance's men had taken strategic positions throughout the square, rifles trained on the crowd. The few remaining deputies were outnumbered and outgunned. And Eli, wherever he was just one man against a small army. "Now," Vance said pleasantly, "my men and I are going to load up what we came for and leave peacefully. I suggest everyone stay exactly where they are until we're gone. Anyone who interferes will be shot. Anyone who follows us will be shot. Anyone who even looks at us wrong will be shot." He paused. "Are we clear?" The crowd's silence was answer enough. Vance's men went to work with brutal efficiency. They brought wagons around, began loading strongboxes from the bank's vault. The fire that had started inside spread, but no one moved to stop it. People just watched, helpless, as another predator took what Blackwood had stolen. Martha found Samuel and Benjamin, and together they crouched behind the wagon, watching the organized pillaging. Sarah's face was streaked with tears of frustration. "This is what we get?" she whispered bitterly. "We expose the truth, we get Blackwood to confess, and instead of justice, we just get different thieves?" "Maybe that's all frontier justice ever is," Samuel said quietly. "Just different men with guns taking turns stealing." But Martha was watching Vance, studying the way he moved, the careful control in his expressions. Something didn't fit. A man like Vance didn't just stumble into Gold Ridge at the perfect moment, didn't just happen to arrive in time to witness Blackwood's confession and claim the spoils. "He was already here," she said suddenly. "Vance, he was here before the confession, before the shooting even started." Samuel looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean this was planned. He waited for the perfect moment, when Blackwood was most vulnerable, when the town was in chaos. He let Eli do the hard work of destroying Blackwood's power, then stepped in to claim what was left." She felt sick. "We all played right into his hands." As if sensing her scrutiny, Vance's eyes found hers across the square. He smiled, tipped his hat in mock courtesy, and Martha knew she was right. They'd been pawns in a game much larger than simple revenge. The loading continued for another hour. Vance's men worked without hurry, taking everything of value from the bank. Property deeds, loan documents, gold certificates. 15 years of Blackwood's empire reduced to cargo in wagons. The fire consumed what was left, smoke rising into the evening sky like a funeral pyre. Finally, Vance mounted his horse. His men climbed onto the wagons, rifles still trained on the crowd. Blackwood remained on the bank steps, his hands bound, blood dried on his face. "One more thing," Vance called out. "Mr. Blackwood here has information about various claims, properties, and assets in this territory. Information that could be quite valuable to the right buyers. I'm taking him with us. Consider it insurance. Anyone tries to come after us, and Mr. Blackwood will have a very unfortunate accident." He smiled. "Of course, he might have that accident anyway. Depends on how cooperative he is." "You can't—" Garrett tried to stand, but his wounded shoulder gave out and he collapsed. "I can," Vance said simply. "I am, and there's not a thing any of you can do about it." He was right. The crowd watched in impotent fury as Vance's men dragged Blackwood to one of the wagons, threw him in like cargo. The procession began to move, heading toward the road out of Gold Ridge. And then Eli Cross stepped into the street. He appeared as if from nowhere, standing in the middle of the road, about 50 yards ahead of Vance's lead wagon. No cover, no support, just one man with a rifle facing down a small army. "You're not taking him," Eli said quietly. But somehow his voice carried, cutting through the evening air like a blade. Vance pulled his horse to a stop, genuinely amused. "Cross, isn't it? I've heard about you. Impressive work taking down Blackwood's operation. Very professional." He paused. "But this is over. You got your revenge. 3 of Blackwood's partners are dead. The 4th is ruined. Take your win and walk away." "He needs to answer for what he did," Eli said. "Not to you, to them." He gestured toward the town. "To the people he destroyed." "The people he destroyed are welcome to file a complaint with the territorial government," Vance said dryly. "As for me, I have a business transaction to complete. Now step aside or my men will move you aside, permanently." Eli didn't move. "You're right that Blackwood's empire is finished. But if you take him, if you let him buy his way out or trade information for his life, then nothing changes. The system that let him build that empire stays intact. Another Blackwood rises up somewhere else. The cycle continues." "And your alternative?" Vance asked. "What, you shoot him in the street? How is that justice?" "It's not," Eli admitted. "But it's closure. It's an ending. It's proof that no amount of money or power can save you if you murder innocent people." His voice hardened. "My wife died begging for her daughter's life. My 6-year-old girl died crying for her mother. They didn't get trials or appeals or chances to buy their way out. They got bullets and fire. Blackwood gets the same." Vance studied him for a long moment. "You know I can't let you do that. I've got 20 armed men. You've got 1 rifle and whatever ammunition you're carrying. The math isn't complicated." "No," Eli agreed. "It's not." He raised his rifle and fired. The shot took Vance's hat clean off his head. Before anyone could react, Eli worked the lever action and fired again, this time shattering a lantern hanging from the lead wagon. Oil spilled, flames caught, and suddenly the wagon was burning. Vance's men opened fire, but Eli was already moving, diving behind a water trough as bullets tore through the space where he'd been standing. Return fire came from the rooftops, miners and townspeople who'd armed themselves, who'd finally found something worth fighting for. The street erupted into chaos again. Vance's men, professionals all, responded with disciplined fire, but they were exposed in their wagons while the townspeople had cover. What should have been a slaughter became a genuine fight. Martha grabbed Benjamin, pulled him close as bullets whined overhead. Samuel returned fire, picking his shots carefully. Around the square, others did the same. People who'd been robbed, cheated, beaten down for 15 years, finally pushing back. The battle was brief but fierce. Vance's men were better trained, better equipped, but they were also outnumbered and caught in the open. Within minutes, 3 of them were down. The others wavered, looking to Vance for orders. But Vance was struggling with his own problem. During the initial chaos, someone had cut the ropes holding Blackwood in the wagon. Now Blackwood was running, stumbling through the street toward the courthouse with his hands still bound. Eli emerged from cover, pursuing. Vance saw him, raised his pistol, fired. The shot missed, and then Eli was on him, pulling him from his horse. They went down in a tangle, fighting hand to hand in the dust. "Cease fire!" Garrett shouted, somehow finding the strength to stand. "Everyone cease fire!" The shooting stopped, though guns remained trained. In the sudden quiet, the sounds of Eli and Vance fighting were sharp and brutal, fists on flesh, gasped breathing, the scuffle of boots in dirt. They separated, both men bloodied. Vance drew a knife, but Eli was faster, his own blade flashing in the firelight. They circled each other like wolves, looking for openings. "You can't win this," Vance said, breathing hard. "Even if you kill me, my men will cut you down." "Maybe," Eli said, "but you'll be dead first, and Blackwood won't have his ticket out of here." "Is it worth it?" Vance asked. "Dying for revenge?" Eli smiled, and there was something terrible in it. "I died 15 years ago. Everything since has just been borrowed time." He attacked, and for a moment the fight consumed everything. Martha couldn't look away, couldn't breathe. These two men, each representing different kinds of frontier violence, battling for the right to decide Blackwood's fate. It ended suddenly. Eli's knife found its mark, sliding between Vance's ribs. The bigger man gasped, stumbled, fell. His men raised their weapons, but Garrett's voice stopped them. "Don't! It's over! Vance is done, Blackwood is caught, and if you boys have any sense, you'll ride out of here before the territorial marshal arrives." For a tense moment, it could have gone either way. Then, one by one, Vance's men lowered their weapons. They'd been hired to do a job, and that job had just died bleeding in the street. Without Vance's leadership, they were just mercenaries in a bad position. They rode out quietly, abandoning the wagons and their wounded, disappearing into the gathering dark. The town watched them go, hardly daring to believe it was really over. Eli stood over Vance's body, swaying slightly, his own blood dripping from half a dozen wounds. Then he turned, looking for Blackwood. The man was cornered against the courthouse steps, surrounded by townspeople. No weapons pointed at him, not yet. Just a wall of angry faces, people whose lives he'd destroyed, waiting to see what happened next. Eli walked toward him slowly, and the crowd parted. Martha found herself moving forward too, drawn by some need to witness the end of this story. Samuel tried to stop her, but she shook him off. She reached the courthouse steps just as Eli did. Blackwood looked up at him, his face a mask of defiant terror. "Do it," Blackwood said. "Pull the trigger. Prove you're just another killer dressed up in righteous words." Eli raised his rifle, aimed it at Blackwood's heart. His finger rested on the trigger, and Martha saw the war in his eyes, 15 years of grief and rage and pain, all focused down to this single moment. "Mr. Cross," she said quietly. He didn't lower the rifle, but his eyes flicked to her. "If you kill him now," Martha said, "you prove him right. You prove that violence is all that matters, that the strong take from the weak and call it justice." She paused. "My son believed in something better. He believed the law could be fair, that claims could be legitimate, that honest work would be rewarded. Blackwood took that belief and destroyed it. Don't let him destroy yours too." "I don't have any beliefs left to destroy," Eli said, but there was less certainty in his voice. "Then borrow mine," Sarah said, appearing beside her mother. "I believe my husband deserves better than having his death avenged by more death. I believe this town deserves to see justice done properly, through law and courts and the system that's supposed to protect people." She looked at Blackwood with pure hatred. "I want him to face trial. I want him to sit in a courtroom and hear every person he hurt testify against him. I want him to spend whatever years he has left in a cell, thinking about what he did. Death is too quick, too easy, too much like mercy." Eli's rifle wavered. He looked at Blackwood, at the crowd, at the burning bank behind them, at the town he'd torn apart in the name of justice. "The territorial marshal is 3 days away," Garrett said, limping forward. His face was gray with pain and blood loss, but his voice was steady. "We can hold Blackwood until then. Have a proper trial in Denver. Use Crane's confession, the witness testimony, everything. He'll hang, no question about that. But it'll be legal, official, real justice, not just revenge." "Legal justice failed me 15 years ago," Eli said quietly. "It let Blackwood and his partners murder my family and walk away rich. So change it," Martha said. "Be the witness who makes sure it doesn't fail anyone else. Help us build the case that puts him away forever. Let the system work this time, not because it worked before, but because you forced it to." The moment stretched out, taut as wire. Then slowly, Eli lowered his rifle. 3 days, he said to Garrett. You keep him alive and secured for 3 days, and I'll testify at his trial. I'll give them every detail of what happened 15 years ago. Every name, every crime, every piece of evidence I've gathered. He looked at Blackwood. But if something happens, if he escapes, if he mysteriously dies, if some legal technicality sets him free, I'll finish what I started. Understand? Garrett nodded. Understood. 2 deputies moved forward, hauled Blackwood to his feet. They bound him properly, dragged him toward what was left of the jail. The crowd followed, a grim procession bearing witness. Martha stayed behind, watching Eli. He stood alone in the square, surrounded by bodies and burning buildings, looking lost, like a man who'd prepared for one ending and gotten another. Mr. Cross, she said gently, thank you for helping us, for trying to make things right. He looked at her with those pale, haunted eyes. I didn't make anything right, Mrs. Carter. I just broke what was wrong and hoped something better would grow in its place. Maybe that's all anyone can do, she said. He smiled, but it was sad. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just a killer who got lucky enough to find targets that deserved it. He paused. Your son's claim. With Blackwood arrested and his company dissolved, the territorial court will likely rule that all properties acquired through fraud revert to their original owners. You'll get your mine back. Will we? Martha felt the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on her. Even if we do, I'm not sure I want it anymore. Too much blood on that ground now. Too many ghosts. Ghosts fade, Eli said. Gold doesn't. Your son found something real in those hills. Don't let what Blackwood did steal that from you, too. He touched his hat. I should go. Town doesn't need me anymore, and staying will just remind people of what happened here. Where will you go? Somewhere else. Somewhere that needs... He trailed off, searching for words. Somewhere that needs what I am. He walked away into the smoke and shadows, and Martha didn't try to stop him. Some men were built for staying, for building, for growing roots. Eli Cross was built for the other thing, for tearing down what was corrupt and hoping someone else could build something better in the rubble. The next 3 days were organized chaos. The territorial marshal arrived with a company of federal troops, imposed actual law and order, began the process of sorting through 15 years of corruption. Blackwood sat in his cell, refusing to speak, his empire of lies collapsing around him. Ashford, the Denver lawyer, worked tirelessly building the case against Blackwood. Crane's confession provided the framework, but it was the testimony of dozens of victims that gave it weight. Martha and Sarah added their evidence about James's claim, but they were just 2 voices in a chorus of the wronged. The Golden Promise mine was indeed returned to the Carter family, along with all of Blackwood's other fraudulently acquired properties. The territorial governor himself signed the order, making a show of frontier justice, finally working as intended. But Martha found that Eli had been wrong about one thing. The ghost didn't fade. Every time she looked at the surveyor's map showing their claim, she saw James's signature, remembered his letters full of hope and plans. The gold felt tainted now, marked by everything they'd witnessed. A week after Blackwood's arrest, Martha sat with Samuel and Sarah in the boarding house, trying to decide what to do with their unexpected fortune. We could work the mine, Samuel said, but without conviction. It's what James wanted, what we came here for. James wanted a fresh start, Sarah said quietly. A chance to build something. I'm not sure this is that anymore. Martha looked at her daughter, saw the strength that had emerged from everything they'd endured. Sarah had lost a husband, crossed a continent, watched a town tear itself apart, and somehow came through it believing in justice and law and the possibility of good. What do you want? Martha asked her. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. I want Benjamin to grow up somewhere the law actually works, somewhere people build instead of steal, somewhere my husband's dream of honest work and fair dealing isn't just naive fantasy. She paused. And I want to make sure what happened here doesn't happen somewhere else. How? Samuel asked. By working with Ashford. He's talking about staying in the territory, building a practice focused on claim disputes and frontier law, making sure people have real legal representation, not just whatever corrupt official Blackwood types can afford. She looked at her parents. The Golden Promise is worth enough to fund that, to be the fresh start James wanted, just in a different way. Martha felt tears prick her eyes. It was perfect. taking Blackwood's theft and transforming it into something that would protect others from the same fate. Justice not as revenge, but as prevention. Yes, she said, that's what we do. They sold the Golden Promise to a mining company out of Denver. Fair price, honest dealing, everything documented and legal. The money was more than they'd ever dreamed of having. They gave half to Ashford to establish his practice, kept enough for themselves to start over somewhere less haunted, and donated the rest to Gold Ridge for rebuilding. The town needed it. The bank was gone, much of Main Street damaged by fire, the entire social structure upended by Blackwood's fall. But in the wreckage, something new was growing. People who'd been afraid were finding their voices. Miners were forming cooperatives to work claims collectively. Businesses were reopening under new ownership, with fair prices and honest practices. It wasn't perfect. It was still the frontier, still rough and dangerous and unpredictable. But it was trying. That had to count for something. Blackwood's trial was held in Denver 2 months later. Martha, Sarah, and Samuel attended, adding their testimony to the mountain of evidence against him. The verdict was never in doubt, guilty on all counts. The sentence was death by hanging. Eli Cross testified for 3 hours, his quiet voice filling the courtroom with 15 years of grief transformed into meticulous documentation. He'd tracked every claim Blackwood had stolen, every person his empire had destroyed, every lie used to justify the thefts. By the time he finished, even the defense attorney looked sick. After the verdict, Martha found Eli outside the courthouse. He looked different somehow. Lighter, maybe, as if testifying had released some weight he'd been carrying. "What will you do now?" she asked. He looked at the mountains in the distance, his expression distant. There are other towns like Gold Ridge, other Blackwoods building empires on blood. Maybe I can help expose them before it takes 15 years and a pile of bodies. "Legally this time?" Martha asked pointedly. He smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "I'll try, but I can't promise to always succeed." "None of us can," Martha said. "We just have to keep trying." He nodded, touched his hat, and walked away. Martha watched him go, this strange man who'd been catalyst and weapon and ultimately, in his own broken way, a force for justice. 6 months later, Martha stood in a small house in California, watching Sarah teach Benjamin his letters while Samuel built furniture in the workshop out back. They'd settled in a farming community north of Sacramento, far from gold fields and boom towns. It was quiet, peaceful. Normal in a way Gold Ridge had never been. Letters arrived occasionally from Ashford, updating them on the territory. Gold Ridge was thriving in new ways: cooperative governance, elected officials, fair courts. The scars from Blackwood's era remained, but they were healing. And once, just once, a letter came with no return address, written in precise handwriting she recognized from Eli's testimony. "Mrs. Carter, there's a town in Montana having troubles similar to Gold Ridge. Powerful men taking advantage, legal system corrupted. I'm working with a territorial judge to build a case before violence becomes necessary. Thought you'd want to know that sometimes the law can work preventatively if someone pushes hard enough in the right places. Your son's dream of honest law and fair dealing isn't naive fantasy. It's just harder than it should be. But some things worth having are." The letter was unsigned, but Martha knew. She folded it carefully, placed it in the box where she kept James's final letters, these pieces of her son's legacy. That evening, as the California sun set over their new home, Sarah asked, "Do you think we did the right thing, leaving the mine, coming here?" Martha thought about Gold Ridge, about Eli Cross, about Blackwood hanging for his crimes, about justice that was messy and complicated and required good people to fight for it, even when the cost was high. "I think," she said slowly, "that we honored your husband's dream in the way that mattered most. Not by digging gold from the ground, but by helping build a world where honest work is protected and powerful men can't steal without consequence." She paused. "That's worth more than any mine." Sarah smiled, went back to teaching Benjamin, and Martha stood at the window watching the peaceful valley, knowing that somewhere in the territories, the fight for frontier justice continued. It would always continue, as long as there were Blackwoods willing to take and Elise willing to stop them. But tonight, in this place they'd built from the ashes of broken dreams, there was peace. Hard won, paid for in grief and blood and sacrifice, but real. And sometimes, Martha thought, peace was its own kind of justice. The frontier would keep turning, keep testing people, Keep demanding they choose between survival and principle. But the Carter family had made their choice. They'd stood for something when it cost them everything, and in doing so, had found something more valuable than gold. They'd found that justice, however imperfect, however hard-fought, was possible. And that was worth the price they'd paid. Outside, the sun touched the horizon, painting the California hills in shades of amber and gold. Benjamin's young voice rose in the quiet evening, practicing his letters, building toward a future his father had dreamed of but never lived to see. A future where law meant something, where honest work was rewarded, where children grew up believing the world could be fair. It wasn't the ending they'd expected when they set out for Gold Ridge 3 months in a lifetime ago, but it was the ending they'd earned, and in the harsh mathematics of the frontier, that was the best anyone could hope for.